The first time I heard Marcus Webb's voice, I was descending at 15,000 feet with a passenger in cardiac arrest. 248 other people in the cabin trying not to panic, and exactly 47 minutes of flight time left to get everyone safely on the ground. My name is Owen Hayes. I'm 26 years old, and I pilot commercial aircraft for Cascade Airways out of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. I've been flying for 7 years, started as a flight instructor, moved to regional carriers, and got my major airline position 2 years ago. I'm good at what I do: spatial awareness, emergency protocol knowledge, and the specific kind of calm that comes from understanding that panic kills more people than the actual emergency does. The flight was Cascade Airways for 112 from Seattle to San Francisco. A Boeing 737-800, scheduled departure 14:30 on a Friday afternoon. Standard route, clear weather, routine flight. We'd been in the air for 38 minutes when flight attendant Sarah knocked on the cockpit door with the urgency that meant something was wrong, but not immediately. Catastrophic. We have a medical situation, she said. Passenger in 1-4C is experiencing severe chest pain, shortness of breath, possible cardiac event. He's conscious but deteriorating. Get the AED deployed, I said. Is there medical personnel aboard? Nurse in 28A, she's with him now. I immediately informed Seattle Air Traffic Control, Cascade for 112, declaring medical emergency. We have a passenger experiencing cardiac symptoms, requesting priority approach and emergency services standby. The controller's voice came back calm and professional. Cascade for 112, Seattle approach copies. Stand by for vectors to Seattle-Tacoma. Emergency services are being notified. What happened next was the procedure we practiced but hope never to experience. My first officer, Karen Chen, started running the emergency descent protocol. I continued flying the aircraft while simultaneously managing communications, passenger briefing, and coordination with ground medical services. The flight attendants were managing 248 passengers who were now acutely aware that something serious was happening. Passenger is unresponsive. Sarah reported from the cabin at minute 6 of the emergency. Nurse is performing CPR. We have the AED connected. How long has he been unresponsive? I asked. Approximately 90 seconds. Brain damage begins around 4 minutes without oxygen. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was running out. I accelerated the descent. We went from cruising altitude of 35,000 feet to 15,000 feet in less than 8 minutes, pushing the aircraft to its emergency descent limits. The cabin pressurization system was working overtime. Some passengers were experiencing ear pain. A few were crying, but they were alive, and they were landing. Seattle approach, Cascade for 112, requesting direct approach to CDAC runway 16L. We have 148 souls aboard with 1 critical cardiac patient. We need emergency services standing by in clear airspace for immediate landing. Cascade for 112, CDAC approach, clear to descend to 5,000 feet. Runway 16L is being cleared. Emergency services are standing by on the tarmac. I'm connecting you with ground control for landing coordination. What I didn't know yet was that ground control coordination would involve a search and rescue coordinator named Marcus Webb who would understand my situation in a way that made everything about the next 40 minutes possible. Cascade for 112. This is CDAC ground control, a new voice said through my headset. Different from approach control, more grounded, more operational. I'm Marcus Webb, coordinating ground emergency response. I have EMS standing by with full cardiac response capability. What's your current status and ETA? Cascade for 112, currently at 12,000 feet, rate of descent 2,500 feet per minute. We have 1 passenger in cardiac arrest, performing CPR in cabin. Edit to runway in approximately 15 minutes. We need the longest available runway and clear emergency access. Runway 16L, 12,000 feet. I'm giving you priority. Approach will vector you direct. EMS has full ACLS capability, advanced life support, defibrillation, medications. What's the patient's status right now? Last report was unresponsive. CPR ongoing. AED deployed approximately 2 minutes ago. Marcus didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted, not panic, but understanding the actual gravity of the situation. Owen, is it Owen? That's correct. Owen, you need to understand something. The patient is in cardiac arrest. That's potentially survivable if we get him on the ground fast and get advanced life support started immediately. But it's also time critical. We have approximately 10 minutes from landing to get him to equipment that can do anything beyond what that nurse can do in the cabin. Can you do this landing in 10 minutes from your current position? I calculated 12,000 feet at 2 500 feet per minute descent rate meant approximately 4.8 minutes to reach landing altitude. At approach pattern, final approach, landing itself approximately 8 minutes total. That was physically possible, affirmative. I can land in 8 minutes. Then that's what we need, Marcus said. I'm going to walk you through approach coordination. I have the tug pilots on standby to push you to the terminal the moment you land. I have medical personnel ready to board immediately after wheels down. I have a clear corridor from the runway to the trauma center. Owen, you're going to do this. And it's going to work. Something about the way he said it, not as a question, not as a hope, but as a statement of absolute confidence, made me believe it was actually possible. The next 8 minutes were the most concentrated flying of my career. Approach control vectored me direct to the runway at 10,000 feet. I was managing descent rate, fuel management, systems checks, and continuous communication with both ground control and the cabin crew. Prepare for emergency landing, I announced over the intercom, keeping my voice level and professional despite the adrenaline. We're landing at Seattle-Tacoma in approximately 5 minutes. All passengers, please assume the brace position. Ground emergency services are standing by. This aircraft will be assisted after landing. The cabin went quiet. That's the moment when everyone understands that this is real. This is happening, and their survival depends on the next few minutes. Cascade 412 approaching final. I reported to Marcus. 5,000 feet, 3 miles from runway on descent approach. Cascade 412. I have you visual. Marcus said, you're perfectly aligned. EMS is in position. Fire department is staged. Your approach looks good. How are you feeling? The question was unexpected. Professional radio communication shouldn't include how you're feeling. But something about the way Marcus asked, not as protocol, but as person to person, made me answer honestly. I'm functioning, I said. Focused on the landing. Concerned about the patient timeline. The patient timeline depends on you getting everyone on the ground safely, Marcus said. If you crash this aircraft trying to rush, nobody wins. You can do this. Steady approach, smooth landing, and we'll do our part on the ground. There's a moment in emergency situations when you realize that you're not alone in the decision-making anymore. When you accept that someone else has your back, and that acceptance actually makes you better at what you're doing, not worse. Cascade 412. 3,000 feet to miles out, I reported. Landing checklist complete. All systems nominal. Final approach. Cascade 412 cleared to land runway 16L, Marcus confirmed. Winds 180 at 8 knots. You're clear all the way down. The landing was textbook. Smooth approach, controlled descent rate, minimal turbulence in the touchdown. We made contact with the runway at 0.8 gigaseconds, barely noticeable to the passengers. Karen immediately deployed the spoilers and activated maximum reverse thrust. We came to a complete stop with approximately 4,000 feet of runway remaining. The moment we stopped moving, everything happened at once. EMS personnel in full emergency response gear were running toward the aircraft. Fire trucks were positioned on both sides of the runway. Ground personnel with emergency equipment were moving into position. I could see, through the cockpit window, the organized chaos of a full emergency response activation. Cascade 412. Emergency services are boarding through forward and rear doors, Marcus reported. Cabin crew expedite passenger evacuation to emergency slides. We have buses standing by for passenger transport. Cabin crew, execute emergency evacuation. I announced. Flight attendants, open doors. Begin deployment of evacuation slides. Move passengers quickly but safely. What happened in the next 6 minutes was organized emergency evacuation passenger training. Actually working. People moving from the aircraft down emergency slides. Being guided by ground personnel into transport buses. No panic. No serious injuries. Just people doing what they'd been trained to do when emergency became reality. The cardiac patient was the priority. EMS personnel boarded the aircraft while it was still in full evacuation mode. Went directly to seat 1 where the nurse was still administering CPR and took over patient care. They deployed the portable defibrillator, administered medications, and prepared the patient for immediate transport to the trauma center. Patient is in asystole. I heard one of the paramedics say through the open cabin door. No spontaneous cardiac activity. Continuing CPR. We need to move. He was being loaded onto a transport gurney, wheeled across the tarmac toward a waiting ambulance, while the remaining passengers continued evacuating down slides. By minute 12 after landing, the aircraft was empty. The patient was in the ambulance, and we were stationary on the runway with emergency vehicles surrounding us. Cascade 412. Aircraft is clear, Marcus reported. Ground services are securing the aircraft. Passengers are being transported to the terminal. You did good work, Owen. That landing was perfect. Status on the patient? I asked. There was a pause. Marcus was probably getting information from EMS personnel, or checking with the hospital, or doing whatever ground coordinators do when a patient is being rushed to the trauma center. EMS is working him actively, Marcus said finally. They're running full ACLS protocols. He's being transported to Harborview Medical Center, which has the best cardiac trauma team in the region. Beyond that, it's now in the hands of the doctors. But Owen, you got him on the ground alive. You gave him a chance. That matters. The standard procedure after an emergency landing is a full aircraft inspection, passenger interviews, and incident documentation. It took approximately 4 hours for the initial response activities to wind down. Karen and I had to file incident reports, coordinate with the airline, and assist with federal investigators who were now going to review everything. That happened during the flight. But around R3, while I was still in the airline operations office completing paperwork, Marcus called my direct line. Owen, it's Marcus Webb. I wanted to check on you. You doing okay? The question was so different from the professional crisis communication we'd been doing that it took me a moment to respond. I'm functional, I said. Still in incident mode, but functional. Is there something operationally that I'm needed for? No, Marcus said. I just wanted to call, to check in. You were good today. Really good. The way you managed that landing, the way you communicated, the way you stayed calm. That's not everyone. A lot of pilots would have panicked, or pushed too hard, or made mistakes under that kind of pressure. I learned from someone on the ground who communicated very clearly about what needed to happen. I said, you made it easier to do the right thing. Marcus laughed a real laugh, not professional, not controlled. We made each other better at our jobs. That's what actually happened. There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when two people have just been through something significant together, and they're both trying to figure out what comes next. I'd like to meet you, Marcus said finally. In person, not as pilot and ground controller, as to people who just went through something that mattered. Are you available after your debrief? I have to file full incident reports, I said. It's probably going to be another 2 hours minimum. I can wait, Marcus said. There's a coffee shop in the airport terminal. I'll be there when you're done. I finished incident reports at 19:30. I'd been awake since 5 o'clock that morning, had experienced an emergency medical situation that had tested every ounce of my training and composure, and had just spent 4 hours documenting every decision I'd made during the crisis. I should have been exhausted. Instead, I found myself cleaning up quickly, changing out of my flight uniform into casual clothes, and heading to the terminal coffee shop to meet a voice I'd only heard through a radio headset. Marcus was sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. He was younger than I'd expected, late 20s, athletic build, dark hair, and the specific kind of eyes that suggested he'd seen things in search and rescue work that most people never experience. He was wearing SAR operational gear with the radio still clipped to his belt. Owen, he said, standing up when I approached. He offered his hand. Marcus Webb, it's good to meet the person behind the voice. We shook hands. His grip was firm, professional, and didn't let go immediately. Marcus, I said, thank you for what you did today, for coordinating, for understanding the situation, I paused, trying to find the words, for making me believe it was possible. You were the one who made it possible, Marcus said. I just coordinated the resources. You actually did the impossible, landed a 737 with a cardiac patient aboard in 8 minutes. We sat down. We ordered coffee. And for the next 2 hours, we talked about what had happened, not the technical details, which we both reviewed exhaustively, but the experience of it. The moment when I'd realized I wasn't alone in the decision-making. The moment when Marcus had recognized that his job wasn't just coordination, but support for someone else who was carrying the primary responsibility. I've been doing SAR work for 4 years, Marcus said. I've coordinated hundreds of emergency responses. But what happened today was different. Usually, the crisis is about the environment, rescuing people from mountains, from water, from weather. Today, the crisis was about keeping people alive during a medical event. It was more intimate, somehow, more personal. Pilot training is all about staying detached, I said. You learn to view the emergency as a problem to solve, not as a human situation that matters. But today, talking to you, I couldn't stay detached, because you wouldn't let me. You made me understand that the patient was a person, not a problem. Is that a bad thing? Marcus asked. No, I said. It made me fly better. It made me more precise, more aware, more determined to actually succeed instead of just following protocol. Marcus smiled. That's why I called you after. I needed to know that the person flying that aircraft was okay. I needed to check on you. Is that part of your job? No, he said. That's the part of my job that nobody trains you for. That's just caring whether the person you're working with survives the experience intact, I realized. Somewhere in that conversation over coffee in the Seattle airport terminal, that I was falling in love with someone I'd only ever heard through a radio. But the connection had been real. The trust we'd built in 8 minutes of emergency had been genuine. And meeting him in person, understanding that the voice and the person were the same, consistent, intelligent, capable, compassionate, made that love feel completely natural. What happened over the next few weeks was the work of building something real. From the crisis-bonded foundation we'd already created, we started with coffee after my flights, continued with dinner at restaurants near the airport, advanced to me attending one of Marcus's SAR training sessions, and understanding exactly what kind of work he did coordinating rescue operations with canine handlers, managing teams, making split-second decisions about resource allocation when lives were at stake. You're very calm under pressure, I said, watching him coordinate a mock rescue operation. So are you? Marcus replied. I learned that from listening to your voice in my headset. By week 3, we weren't hiding what was happening anymore. By week 4, we were spending nights together, not just romantically, but actually waking up together, having coffee together, understanding that this wasn't a crisis-bonded temporary connection. It was something real. The cardiac patient, we learned, had survived. He'd had severe coronary artery occlusion, required emergency angioplasty, spent 3 days in the ICU, and had a long recovery ahead. But he was alive because I'd gotten him on the ground in 8 minutes. And EMS had met him at the tarmac, and the trauma center had received him prepared and ready. Marcus had written to the hospital and gotten a message back. The patient was alive, was expected to make a full recovery, and had specifically asked about the pilot and the ground controller who had coordinated his care. He wants to meet us, Marcus said, reading the hospital letter. He's being discharged next week and wants to say thank you in person. Epilogue: for months later, the Pacific Northwest Maritime Rescue season arrives in September, which is when Marcus's SAR team gets most active. I'm off rotation most weekends, which is when Marcus does his most intensive K9 training coordination. We've learned to fit our lives together around our schedules, not by one compromising, but by both understanding that our work matters, and therefore our ability to do that work well matters even more. We're hiking in the Cascades on a weekend when I'm off rotation, and Marcus has scheduled training coordination nearby. The weather is perfect: clear skies, crisp air, the specific kind of mountain beauty that makes you understand why people choose to live in the Pacific Northwest despite the rain. I was thinking, Marcus says as we're sitting on a ridge overlooking Puget Sound, about what we were doing when we met. I was coordinating an emergency. You were managing a crisis. We were both doing what we trained our entire lives to do. And we did it well together, I say. That's what matters. But I want to do something else well together too, Marcus says. Something that's not emergency, not crisis, not about coordinating resources or managing danger. What? I ask. A life? He says. Just the life. Waking up together, making coffee together, being boring together. That sounds extraordinary, I say. He kisses me there on the ridge overlooking Puget Sound. And it's perfect in the way that quiet moments are perfect. No sirens, no emergency communication, no adrenaline. Just two people who learned to trust each other in the worst conditions, and had chosen to stay together in the best ones. The cardinal rule of flying is that you always have a co-pilot, someone who can take over if you become incapacitated. But the better rule, the one they don't teach in flight school, is that you want someone sitting next to you not because they have to be, but because they choose to be. Marcus chose to be. I chose to be. And that choice, made in peace instead of crisis, turned out to be the most important navigation decision I ever made.